Welcome. This is the last session of the Economic Development track of the Iowa Ideas Conference. Thank you to our sponsors, Cedar Rapids Economic Development and ITC Midwest. I'm Erin Jordan, and I have the pleasure of moderating this panel called The Solar Neighbor. With this great panel of experts who will introduce themselves in a minute, we'll be talking about ways to reduce friction between large-scale solar projects and the people who live nearby. There's closed captioning access for today's session, and the conversation is being recorded to post later online. If you have questions for our guests, please submit them through the Whova app, and I will integrate them as we go along with the conversation. Now, I'll ask our panel to introduce themselves. Charlie, would you mind starting?
Sure. I'm Charlie Nichols. I'm the Planning and Development Director for Lynn County. I've been with the county for about 4 years. Over the past 2 years, we've approved 3 different utility scale solar projects. It's approximately 2,000 acres of solar panels, producing about 300 megawatts of power. These have been fairly controversial for our community. We've had to rent out gymnasiums because our normal meeting rooms couldn't hold the crowds we were getting. On top of that, we've recently updated our ordinance for utility scale solar projects, and we completed that about 2 months ago. And we're expecting another project soon for the Dwayne Arnold site near Palo.
Great. Terry?
Hi, I'm Terry Dvorak. I own Redline Renewables. We're a solar developer and finance company out of the Des Moines area. And we've got 120 something different solar arrays throughout the state that help cities and schools. We're mostly on the distributed generation side, so not quite as big as some of the large utility scale, but we deal with the community as well. And 11.5 megawatts in and saving customers close to $26 million a year over the next, or $26 million over the next 30 years. So we're happy to be involved. Thanks for inviting us.
Yeah, thank you. And Justin?
Hi, my name is Justin Foss. I work for Alliant Energy. For the last 4 years, my role has been to develop solar and other renewable generation across Iowa. We're putting on right now in the process of building 400 megawatts of solar in Iowa, including some of what will be the largest projects here in the state. I also develop very small projects, and I've sat around dinner tables and boardrooms at businesses and homes across Iowa here for the last several years to bring this new renewable energy to the forefront and to go from having minimal to having a good amount.
That's great. Thank you. The 2023 Iowa Climate Statement came out this week. This statement was signed by, I think, 231 Iowa science faculty, said the state needs more solar energy to combat climate change. Right now, emissions from transportation, electricity, and industry make up 75% of emissions nationwide. But these sectors also have made tremendous improvement in recent years. Justin, I was hoping you could start us off by sharing more about the role solar plays now and will play in the future in terms of reducing greenhouse gas emissions from the energy sector.
You bet. When we think about emissions and where we get our power from, traditional fossil fuels create emissions, and we're working to reduce those. But what we're trying to do is implement more resources that create zero emissions, like solar and wind energy. What we're seeing is a move towards a more diverse mix of generation sources across Iowa for both Alliant Energy and all the other utility providers here in the state. Whereas the main source of energy used to be 100% coal in Iowa, if we think back more than 100 years ago, today it is changing rapidly. And in fact, more than half of the energy that we delivered to customers in the last year came from renewable sources. Solar in particular is getting a lot of talk because it's new, but there's just not a lot of it out there. So we're going from essentially very, very minimal or zero to some. And as we talk about getting to that some, is getting a lot of talk and a lot of attention. And so we're seeing a lot of engagement and a lot of questions come up about what does this look like, because it's new. We're used to seeing turbines, we're used to seeing big power plants, but we're not used to seeing the solar panels. And so as we create some, we're getting a lot of questions and engagement.
Well, and on that kind of topic of transition, just recently the coal-fired plant in Lansing came down, right?
Yep. So the permits expired for that facility. So we were no longer able to run that. And that's one of the many examples of facilities that we've retired in the last 10 to 15 years. We had a big power plant in downtown Cedar Rapids, 6th Street, that retired back in 2009. And we've had many others retire across the state as well. So as we continue to transition to that new generation mix that's cleaner and more renewable, we're seeing, more diversity. Like I said, it used to be all coal, and now it's coals, gas, wind, solar, batteries, and we're excited to see kind of where we go next. But what's for sure is that it's going to be more solar because, like I said, we're going from very minimal amounts to some.
Harry, as you said, you've been developing not utility scale solar projects, but large scale solar projects for 15 years. How have you seen the landscape change in terms of support or opposition from neighbors?
And I have done utility scale solar in my earlier years, 10,
Okay.
15 years ago. We've just focused more on the distributed side in the last 10 years. Since I work mostly on the distributed side for the customer, so like for that school district or for a city, there's a lot more community acceptance because they see the benefit right to them. They see that we're saving the city money or we're saving the school money. They translate that to their taxpayer dollars. Whereas, if Alliant or utility puts it in, they don't quite see how that's going to affect them on their rate structure or not. And we like that. I mean, we get a lot more community involvement. They're usually very pro solar, pro clean energy. I mean, once in a while you get one that's not, but the majority of them are very pro for it, and that makes sense because they're reaching out to us anyway. So if they weren't for solar, they wouldn't be reaching out to us to start with. So we see a lot more acceptance. More and more people are seeing solar out there. If you drive through the countryside, you're bound to run across a farm that's got one. You're going to see some residences, and all our cities have them. And I think as today, most people have seen solar. They're considering it for themselves. Whereas 10 years ago, it was relatively new in the state. So I see a lot more acceptance nowadays.
That makes sense. Now, Charlie, you had said, and the Gazette has written about how Linn County recently updated its solar ordinance. Would you tell us some of the key points of that and how well you think it satisfied the different parties?
Yeah, so I think one of the key points of that is just the process we took to update our ordinance. It's kind of unique. We have a lot of interest, a lot of passion in the community around these projects, both people who are very supportive of them and people who have concerns. We wanted to try and leverage that passion and that energy when we were taking a look at our ordinance and making some changes. So we formed 4 different review committees where we involved members of the public in examining our current ordinance before we updated it, and then making some statements on how we could improve that. You had people in these committees that were very strongly opposed to projects in the past or very strongly supportive. So these groups had to kind of work together and compromise and make statements for us to work off of. Some of the things that we did end up changing in our most updated ordinance was setbacks. We increased them a little bit for occupied dwellings. We put in some formal landscaping screening requirements. We put in requirements around vegetation around and under the solar panels. We put in some language on agricultural impact mitigation. A big thing that we're trying to hit on is preserving agricultural resources on these sites so that in the future, if the projects are decommissioned and it goes back to agricultural production, that soil can still be healthy and productive. We added in some language on battery energy storage systems, which we're now seeing to start to be built around Iowa, both integrated with solar projects but standalone. And another, I think, high point of our ordinance is our decommissioning standards requiring financial security so that in the future, when projects are decommissioned, we can ensure that there's funds there to do it. The question of, is everyone happy with the code ordinance or the ordinance updates? I would say no. The statements in our code was a compromise. We're trying to incorporate the needs, the opinions, the feelings of very different sets of stakeholder groups. But I do think that our community and our review committees were able to work together really well to have an ordinance that, if everybody's not super happy with it, most people are at the same level of a little bit unhappy, but understanding why we've made the changes we've made.
Just as a follow-up question, as you're going through the process, how did you find a balance between a code that's strong enough but not too strong to just prevent solar altogether?
And that's a great question. And it helps a lot that we've had 3 projects in Linn County so far that applied and were approved. So we know the code that we had works and that projects can get built under that code. So our goal was to push the envelope a little bit, make our projects in the future stronger, but not make our code so overly burdensome that projects cannot be built. We still would like to see projects apply, be built in Linn County, just to a slightly higher standard. It also helps that we do have such great local resources here. We have Alliant based in Cedar Rapids. We have NextEra staff, that's one of the solar developers. Some of them are based in Linn County. They're coming to the public meetings. They're sharing their concerns about, if you go this direction, it's going to make it very hard for solar projects to be built in the future. So we were able to really use the knowledge of our past projects and our past code, and then get feedback from just members of the public who are very knowledgeable during the process of updating our ordinance.
Yeah, that's I think sometimes there's this perception with zoning ordinances or things like that with wind or CAFOs or things like that, that they're just designed to like keep projects out. So I think it's interesting how you talk about kind of threading that needle and making it possible, but it's stronger than what you had before. So land use has been a big sticking point with some opponents. Many people don't think any land should be taken off the table for agriculture. There's some work in Iowa and elsewhere to try to combine both agriculture and solar on the same parcel. Justin, I know Alliant has been involved in a new project in Ames. Would you be able to tell us more about that?
Yeah, we're excited to see the potential for more agrivoltaics, and that's the industry term. And when we think about that, we think about how can we combine agriculture with solar production. So can we lift the panels high enough off the ground so that you can get a tractor underneath? Could we lift them high enough off the ground so that you don't get as much shading, or you get strategic shading? So you can grow certain types of crops on land that maybe you wouldn't have otherwise, or you can grow those crops and also get a revenue from the solar that's on the land. We're in the process of building a project in partnership with the Iowa State University to explore some of those opportunities on how that best works together. When we hear from a lot of farmers today, they'll say, I've got a tractor and the plow I pull behind it, is 60 feet, 80 feet wide. How are you going to adjust that? And the answer is that won't work with what we're doing. So it's how do we adjust the solar? And then also, how do we adjust the farming implements, or think about the farming that we're going to do differently? I have talked with a lot of others here in Iowa who are thinking about how can we use sheep to graze on the pasture on the land that would be underneath the solar panels. And that serves a dual use. A, it prevents us from having to use mowers to keep some of that land down. B, it provides opportunity for more livestock, for the sheep to use. So we're exploring these opportunities to understand what makes sense and where can we deploy them.
And just on the front of agrivoltaics, I know, Charlie, you had said that there was some surveying of Linn County residents about that.
Yeah, so on agrivoltaics, really from our comprehensive plan standpoint, that's an ideal situation. Comprehensive plans are something that cities and counties have that you are making your land use decisions off of. And 2 of our elements of our comprehensive plan are alternative and renewable energy and resource protection, particularly agricultural resources. So with solar projects, what we're doing with our zoning code is really trying to balance that trade-off between the renewable energy and the resource protection. If you can get both farming practices and renewable energy production on a project site, that hits both of those elements, and then the trade-off is much less because you can do both things on the site. And we did talk about this quite extensively with our renewable energy review committees. Those were the groups looking at our ordinance that helped us update our ordinance. And what we found from conversations with our committee members is, yes, they view agrivoltaics as a great way to use just those agricultural resources, soil resources on site, but it's also viewed as a good neighbor practice similar to landscape screening or setbacks, where we have a lot of people living around these projects that are concerned of what's it going to look like once the project's built. Maybe they've lived there quite a while and they're just concerned and trying to visualize what's the new landscape going to look like. What we heard from them is that incorporating some of those agrivoltaic practices, keeping some of those agricultural practices on site, helps to mitigate or reduce kind of that visual dissonance where you might have seen farm fields in the past and now you're seeing solar panels. So they really brought up 2 points on agrivoltaics. One, it's good to, if it can still be used for agricultural production, great, but also it helps to mitigate or offset just that really massive change in land use. So it's also viewed as kind of a good neighbor practice.
What kind of crops, from what you guys have heard, can grow in and among solar panels?
So it's really different. First off, you got the ability for pollinator mix, and so you've got a lot of bees, right? It is a great opportunity for that. But sometimes it's more the vegetables like peppers and some of the other more intensive crops that you would use, or the more unique crops. It doesn't work so well to try and grow corn and soybeans like what we do on the industrial scale, but you can use some of those more unique crops.
Terry, has that ever been you seeing any of that with your projects?
Absolutely. I mean, we've got a couple of our ground mount arrays that we've seeded down with low growing prairie mix, so pollinator species and low growing grasses. And like Justin said, I mean, it's twofold. One is to help the environment and have more pollinators. We need more bees and places for them to go, to help our gardens and stuff. But it also helps us on the maintenance side. Instead of mowing grass, every 2 weeks or so, we're mowing it twice a year. So it reduces how much gasoline is used to mow the grass, and it's lower intensive, and we get both benefits. I've also seen where we'll plant alfalfa underneath. That's a low growing one. It doesn't get below there. I've seen, the sheep grazing is one I've seen, because they don't chew on wires like goats do, and they don't rub their backs like cows do. But I've also seen where we've had raised arrays in other parts of the country, not us, but I've seen them, so they can graze cattle underneath them too. So it's definitely coming. I mean, it's one, like I said, I've been in it for 15 years. When I looked at a project in New Jersey 10, 12 years ago and threw out the idea of vegetable farming in between the rows, they all looked at me funny. And now it seems to be vogue. Let's look at agrivoltaics. We even got a term for it, agrivoltaics. So.
Right, fancy. So a Lynn County reader reached out to me in the last month or so. I think this is kind of as the Next Era Energy project has gotten underway near Palo in Lynn County. She expressed some concerns about what she saw as topsoil being scraped off the site. I wanted to just talk with the group about what the standard practices are for preparing a site for a solar development, and how do you preserve the integrity of the soil and land?
So I go out and talk to landowners, like I said, at their dinner table, and topsoil is gold here in Iowa. And so every landowner wants to make sure that A, their topsoil is not going anywhere, and that B, we're not destroying that topsoil by intermingling it with other stuff. Construction practices over the last several years and the last decade have vastly improved. And not only the style at which they do that, but the skills of the workers that are doing it. So we're able to set the topsoil aside while we maybe adjust some of the contour of the land, and then bring that topsoil back in. So there is times where we have to remove topsoil in order to adjust the contours of the land, but we know that we need to put that topsoil back in, and so we segregate it so we can do that and not commingle that topsoil. In addition, the types and the equipment that we use to install solar panels nowadays. The racking that we use has improved drastically, where it can go now on more hills than it used to be able to do. So we have to do less grading. We have to do less changing than what we did just 10 years ago.
Yeah, I was going to say the same thing. What the solar farms that I built 15 years ago are different than the solar farms that are getting built now because the technology is different. The equipment it's got more flexibility to it. You know, it's designed to work on rolling hills versus completely flat ground. And you're right. I mean, it's usually what you see for grading is one of two things. One, it's taking out any little ravines or whatever that causes, so it's minor grading throughout there. But I see farmers doing the same thing. I'm from a farming family, so I mean I see my brother, you know, he'll go to an area and he'll strip out some of the rough trees and rough bushes so he can, you know, get another row in or something. You see him plow. I always laugh when I see farmers plowing around telephone poles into the ditches. So, you know, we see that all the time. But you know, the less they can. The other place is the roads. I mean, you do have to maintain them. You got to put in some roads. That's about all we really see for grading. Is just like Justin said, a little bit for any type of ditches or waterways that are, you know, can't allow us to do that flow through with that undulating terrain where they're too jagged or something, or roads to get out there for maintenance.
And from the county's perspective, we're really focusing on trying to preserve those agricultural resources as much as possible. And as Justin mentioned, topsoil is one of the big agricultural resources that we have. And our code requires, and we've worked with our applicants in the past on developing agricultural impact mitigation plans where the developers are calling out, you know, topsoil is going to be stored here, it's going to be segregated, and then when construction is done, the topsoil will be spread out again and we'll get some vegetation planted. So that is something that we're really trying to emphasize on these projects. You know, grading is another thing that we are trying to encourage developers to grade as little as possible. In our most recent ordinance update, we've incorporated a scorecard where projects have to meet a minimum threshold score, and they get more points for the less grading they do. That is also such a big part of preserving those agricultural resources.
Well, and I saw a picture, I think it was on the Red Lion Renewables site, that showed a solar project that was kind of on a hill, and it looked really cool. Like, I think that's almost like a more attractive feature than something that's just flat. I don't know if you guys have heard any feedback along those lines.
I personally like it. I mean, it's for me, it's twofold. One, we're just working with the land, and I mean, it costs to grade. I mean, so regrading a site has a cost to it. So if we don't have to, why spend that money? And like I said, I think I know which project you're talking about. It's in Geneseo, Illinois, right over the border. But you know, we have that we actually have a solar array in the middle of Palo. So it's not a 200 megawatt site, it's a 200 kilowatt site. But you know, you can see some undulation to that. That's a relatively flat piece of ground, but you can see some undulation to that too. And it's a benefit it's less costly in general to not have to regrade a site.
Yeah. Terry, let's stick with you for a minute. You know, you touched on the idea of maybe there's less friction when you're working with a school district or community. Can you tell us how that sort of project starts, and if that origination has anything to do with maybe there being less contention along the way?
Well, we've had them start from a variety of ways. I mean, the exciting one is one we're just finishing up in Wapello schools right now, and that was one that was actually started by the kids. So that was one the fifth through seventh grade robotics team actually came up with the project, reached out to us and said, "Hey, we want to look at solar and energy for our school," and I taught them how to do it, and they actually created the project. So those are exciting to have them come to fruition. And obviously those when your kids and your neighbors' kids or your, you know, nieces and nephews and all that is going to your school district and helping your school district, it's a lot. The community support is just incredible. Other ones, you know, the administration will come to us, or maybe it's a school board member or somebody in the community to say, hey, I'd like to look at it for this. I'd like to look at it for our school. I'd like to look at it for our church. I'd like to look at it for a city. They see another city that's done it and they've talked, and, you know, they talk about it and they learn that, you know, some of them it's possible to have a savings. I mean, you know, I would say 50-50. Some of ours do save money and some of them don't. And the ones that don't, we don't do. We just, you know, we analyze and we let them know, hey, here's the reality of it. It works or it doesn't work. The technology works. There's no question there. It's just whether the economics work. And, you know, it's getting more and more. And when we do it in that manner, you know, the knowing that it's saving that school or that city money, which is taxpayer money, it gets a lot more, I don't want to say involvement, but a lot more acceptance that, hey, this is a good thing for our school. This is a good thing for our city. We all know that we need to do these things for the environment and climate change. I mean, I don't remember what the latest, how many billions of dollars were spent on climate disasters last year. It was something like $300 billion. You know, this is stuff that we can try to prevent. That cost comes down to us all eventually, whether it's in taxes or it's in our insurance costs or it's in cost of materials, whatever, you know, that all comes to us eventually. We don't really realize that, you know, the health cost of having, you know, coal versus clean wind or solar. You know, that never gets explored, although I think University of Iowa's got a study out there several years ago about that. So it's getting more and more vogue, and it's getting more and more to where more people want to see solar and they want to see clean energy, and their kids are talking about it and their kids are pushing it. And we've got this next generation coming up that's saying, hey, we know we've got to do something. We've got a problem, and this is one way we can do it. And we get a lot of acceptance at Redline because we help make it feasible. You know, it's we want to do it now. It's how can we pay for it, and so that it's not a premium to do it. So we try to bridge that gap and make it a win-win all the way around.
I have a question from the audience before we get too far from agrivoltaics. From a state lawmaker out there listening into our panel. What role can state policy play in promoting agri-solar or agrivoltaics?
On the agrivoltaic side, I don't know about a policy there. I mean, I think it comes down to like what Charlie's got going on in Linn County, where you're trying to make sure that we're minimizing any topsoil loss, and we're making sure those are happening. I think most developers are going to do that anyway. I can't really speak for all of them because I tend to do distributed generation. I'm working with that individual customer. I mean, if I'm talking with a county conservation board, of course they want to put pollinator species in. I mean, it's part of their directive. The other thing that the state legislature can do is just let's make sure that, you know, if a customer wants to reduce their carbon footprint and wants to be more environmentally friendly and wants to go solar, let's not limit them. Let's not say, hey, you can only do 150 kilowatts here. We know you could use a whole lot and the economics may be better, but we're going to limit you to that. Or, you know, let's make it to where it, you know, we're not trying to have policies or rate cases that penalize the non-solar users, but let's not penalize the solar user because they've made the choice to be a leader to not only control their own energy costs, but really to do it for the future of next generations, for doing it for our climate, for our neighbors and all this stuff. Let's not penalize them. Let's promote that and make sure those make sure that restrictions aren't there. I mean, Alliant does a great job, Midian does a great job, but the other utilities aren't as regulated because they're not investor owned. I mean, we run into this quite a bit, and some of it's education, and some of it is, you know, it's a monopoly, and sometimes they can play that way. So we don't want that to happen. We want to make sure that if a customer wants to offset their carbon footprint and be environmentally friendly, let's not penalize them for doing that.
And Justin, would you have anything to add to that? If you've got, you know, if there's some policy things that could shift to encourage agrivoltaics?
Well, I think it's a matter of encouraging it is wonderful, right? No question about it. We should encourage it. It's not always the best solution. It's not always the lowest cost solution. Sometimes the equipment required to do agrivoltaics successfully is very expensive. So you add cost to it, and the question is who's to pay that cost? That's always a question that we want to ask. Another piece is sometimes the landowners, when we talk to them about this, I've talked to many farmers and landowners here in Iowa. They're 60, 65 years old, and they're ready to give up or to retire. And maybe nobody in the family wants to continue farming. And if we come to them and we say, look, I'd love to do this, but you got to keep farming the land. And they're saying, that's not what I want to do. Right. And so now whose responsibility is it to do the agra under the voltaics? Is that the landowner's responsibility? Is that the utility's responsibility? Is there some sort of partnership that could be there? That's great. It's just it's you can't force the hand because it doesn't always play perfectly. But it is something that is, hey, let's have a way to encourage that. And also, how do we get counties to kind of get on the same board? We've got some counties that are really supportive of solar and finding ways to do it correctly. And we've got some counties that are passing ordinances that on the books allow it, but in reality prevent it. So, how do we kind of work together on that? That's how I would respond.
Well,
I'd
and
like
Charlie,
to add something there too. I mean, I agree with what Justin's saying, but we talk about limiting, there's some outcry about solar projects taking up land, but you don't talk about a new housing development taking up ag land or a new commercial development taking up ag land.
yeah,
A solar field is a heck of a lot more environmentally friendly and less impact to the land than us going out and putting up a Walmart or a new housing development. I mean, it's you kind of got to be fair on both sides. If you want to restrict a farmer or a landowner to say, no, I don't want you to put solar on your farm, I don't want you to turn your land into a solar farm, but then not have the same restriction on, okay, I don't want to let you put a CAFO up, or I don't want you to put a Casey's gas station, or I don't want you to put a residential development. I mean, why are we taking that choice away from that landowner?
I was just going to say, I think what Charlie, what you were talking about with Lynn County is a way to where you have it written into your ordinance where you get more points if you do it, is a way. I guess that's kind of policy, but at a county level.
Right, and we're not requiring it. We do understand that it's still an emerging area. It does add more costs, and I think where agrivoltaics are right now, pilot projects are still massively beneficial. So smaller scale kind of demonstration, figuring out what works. So funding from the state level, if that's possible, I think could help move our knowledge of agrivoltaics along. From Lynn County's perspective, if one of our projects had a demonstration, 1 or 2 acres of a agrivoltaic practice, that would be fantastic. But again, we realize, back to Justin's point, agrivoltaics are expensive. Depending on what you're doing, you might also need a well, irrigation, people on site in a very regulated area that is fenced off with high voltage. There's cost considerations, there's safety considerations. It's not simple to do, at least at this point.
Question from the audience. This member says, I am currently working on solar ordinances in 25 Iowa counties. About half are fully supportive of solar. The other half want to prevent it with very restrictive ordinances. Is there any appetite for a statewide ordinance?
Well, depends on what that ordinance is, I suppose. I mean, I see some cities, throw in ordinances too, where they don't want somebody to put solar in their backyard. And I'm kind of against, obviously I have a biased opinion. I'm kind of against that because there's not an ordinance that says, my neighbor can't paint his house pink. I don't really like the look of a pink house and I don't like the shed they put in the back or something like that. I can't say anything about that or have no being, but I can keep them from putting solar in. I mean, that seems a little unfair on both sides.
So a statewide ordinance, not likely.
I don't see it.
You know, that's not a decision for me and for my company to make. We hear from communities all the time that they appreciate local control. You know, that's a debate that's happening at the state level. What we can do is talk about how do we encourage it, right? And you know, how do we talk about landowner rights? As Terry was just saying, I've had more than one farmer confide in me, saying that they feel like they are being forced to live in a snow globe, in that they are forced to toil all day in their land, so that the other people who live around them who don't farm can appreciate and see them driving their tractor, them driving their combine, them growing their crops. And when they want to change that, or they want to use their land for some other way, because they've paid money to buy their land to make revenue off of their land, now all of a sudden they're being told you can't do that. And I see that in counties across the state. You know, Lynn County's got a great ordinance that kind of puts it and it gives a pathway for it. But I've seen some that it's just nope. No matter what you do, you as a landowner cannot use your land to make revenue off of it, and that's hard. That's a hard pill for a lot of the landowners we're talking to.
Yeah. Now, we're going to go to one more audience question here before we shift gears a little bit. This audience member says, I have a 10 kilowatt array on my pole barn and it isn't eating up any additional land. There's a lot of rooftops out there. Why, you know, what's the benefit of these large solar farms when there's all these rooftops available?
Well, I'm a proponent of the distributed side, like your audience member is talking about, because it is utilizing an underutilized space. I mean, we put solar on rooftops, we put them in parking lots, we put them along bike trails. You know, we give them a second use to create pavilions out of them. We use marginal land sometimes, you know, land that is not prone for farming, or I generally use it in smaller tracts because I'm dealing on the smaller side. But I think there's a lot of potential. I mean, there's huge potential for rooftops and parking lots throughout the state. A lot more potential there than there's probably more feasibility than taking out prime crop ground. But most of the solar arrays I've seen across the country are not taking out prime crop ground. It's very rare for that there, because prime crop ground, geez, in Iowa, it's, you know, $15,000 an acre. You know, a developer would rather buy $5,000 an acre to put that on. It's just a cost impact. So I think it's, as your state climate report said, you know, we need more solar. We need it on both sides. We need to be putting it on the distributed side, putting it on rooftops, on parking lots, you know, in cities, etc. And we also need to take some large chunks of it out at a time, which is what, you know, these utility scale ones. But I think we're still doing it with as much marginal ground as we can and not taking out the best prime crop ground there is. Wouldn't you agree, Justin?
Yeah, it comes down to, what does the landowner want? We never put a project where we don't have a voluntary agreement with the landowner to do that with. Some landowners are blessed because they've made improvements to their land to improve their CSR score. Some landowners don't have that, and we know that prime crop ground in Iowa is bountiful. That's what I swear I hear from every single county and every landowner. Well, I've got the best farm ground in this county. It's the best, and in reality, it is. It's so good across Iowa that it's hard to think about that. Where I'd go back to that question though is, it's the economies of scale. Really is what it comes down to. Roofs are great. We need it on both places, but putting a small array on a roof, you've got to pay hefty for the interconnection costs, versus putting a big array on the ground where you can socialize those costs and get more economies of scale. The answer is both. The answer is both. You can't just have the big stuff and you can't just have the little stuff, but that's the driver, is the economies of scale in order to make the costs lower for everybody.
And I can touch on that a little bit too, because this is something that we see come up pretty often in our public meetings. And the way it was explained to me is kind of just what Justin said, those economies of scale. You know, you can do rooftop gardens where you grow food on a rooftop, and that's great. But if you're trying to feed thousands of people at cost, it's much cheaper to do that on, acres of farmland. It's the same with solar. If you're trying to provide hundreds of megawatts of power, it's going to be cheaper to do that on a larger site than a bunch of scattered rooftops.
Okay, I want to talk a little bit about the idea that landowners who are near solar developments might wonder what's in it for me. I know there are some good neighbor incentives that can be offered by developers. So just kind of want to get into that. What are these good neighbor incentives? Who gets them? How much are they worth? And what do neighbors agree to do in return?
So we execute good neighbor agreements across the projects when they want it. Sometimes it's in a formal agreement. Sometimes it's just having an open line of communication to set expectations. Sometimes when we're designing a project, we know we could put it here, we could put it here. We could move it 100 feet down the fence line. What's the impact? What's best for everybody? And sometimes we have the ability to take feedback and to adjust the project a little bit. Sometimes we don't, just because of the way the land works. So, one of the things that we usually ask for when we're signing a good neighbor agreement with somebody who's not leasing land into the property is we say, hey, look, we understand that you are encumbered by this, and not that it affects your property, but it affects your sight line. The world around you is different than what it was. So if there's a problem, so we will be able to give you some compensation for that. On the flip side, though, we say, look, if there is a problem, we ask you to come to us first, so we can make it right. So that we're not paying somebody to then go and try and subvert a project. Instead, we're trying to build that relationship where we say, look, if you've got a problem, let us know. Give us a first crack at making it right. It doesn't ever prevent anybody from doing anything, but it's trying to create that open and honest conversation.
And how much are those, I mean, ballpark, what are those incentives worth?
I mean, it really just depends. Unfortunately, I can't give a good answer for that. It just depends on how much somebody's impacted, right? And what they want to do. So that's, yeah, it's hard. It'll buy usually it'll buy a few more presents around the Christmas tree every year. And maybe more than that, but they're not leasing land to the project. So we're not taking away their revenue stream and having to replace it with something else. It's different.
Okay. Now, I know this was a question that I had wondered early on is, if you are buy a project, could you get like discounted energy rates?
I wish as a regulated utility, we can't do that in Iowa. But yeah, that'd be great. What Alliant Energy does have is we've got our community solar program, in which here in Cedar Rapids, we have now finally we've fully subscribed our first one here in Iowa, and we're preparing to set sights on building another one here in Iowa, where customers can buy into that program. But of course, that forces the buy into it, but it's not a just live by it and be able to get that benefit for free.
And Aaron, on the good neighbor payments for neighbors that might be adjacent to a project, we have seen that start to happen. It's by no means the norm in the industry, but we've tried to incentivize that again on our scorecard. We award points for projects that are providing good neighbor payments. We see it as a great way to try and reduce that friction between these uses and hopefully kind of just mitigate some of that concern and that fear from neighbors who live around the project. Again, it's not something that is super widespread, but we know that there are some developers doing it, and we're trying to encourage it as much as we can.
Is that do you feel like is that something you've seen come up, Terry, in your projects?
Rarely. I mean, we've seen a couple of projects where, somebody has, especially in a ground mount array where we've had a fence around it to prevent vandalism and, inadvertent harm or anything like that, where somebody was using that property when they shouldn't have been. They shouldn't have been walking their dog out there, or just letting it run out there. Or, I've heard stories of people, grazing their horses out there, and it wasn't their land to be grazing on in the first place. So, I really don't get a whole lot of it on our side. Now, the majority of our projects are off the ground. So, they're up on roofs, they're a canopy in a parking lot, which the neighbors love because they are the first ones to park there. The ground mount arrays, most of ours are, wastewater treatment plants or water treatment plants where nobody should be back there anyway. But the few that we have had in town, the neighbors have been fine. I mean, Palo's got one right there, and I don't hear much for complaints on it. I think I had a couple initially because they were, well, now I can't go play baseball out there. Well, it wasn't yours to be playing baseball out there in the beginning. So, I'm sorry, but overall, no, we don't have many complaints about our projects.
So I know all of you have, you've been out there kind of on the front lines, kind of talking with Iowans about solar. And I wondered if each of you might be able to share a story of a conversation you had where you helped kind of reach a middle ground, or, dispel a myth that helped a project move forward. Justin, I know you said you went down to Union County?
Yep. So we've got a couple. When we approached Union County down in south central Iowa to do a project down there, and at the time they did not have an ordinance regulating solar, and we said that, hey, look, we think that it makes sense for you to have one, just to create expectations for people in the county. Being a responsible developer, we wanted to be able to do that. So we went and talked to them, and we answered lots of questions about what's in the panels, what's the glare from the panels. And people think, when they hear about solar panels, oftentimes they think about skyscrapers that are full of glass windows and the giant glare that you see from them all the time. And so that's a question we get a lot. And the reality is that solar panels are meant to absorb light and UV rays, and not shine them back at the world around them. So we explain that, and then the other things that we do glare analysis on each of these projects, just to make sure that we're not causing any issues. And in fact, just yesterday I sat in a 2-hour meeting to talk about the glare analysis on one of the projects, and we realized that the one time that this individual spot of the project would cause glare is because the sun would be setting directly above it. And so you wouldn't see the glare unless you were staring directly into the sun. And so I say to myself, okay, is that really causing glare, or is that just you're staring into the sun because it's right underneath it, right? So we talk a little bit about what's reality, what's not. And what I find oftentimes is that these conversations can be highly emotional. And when you can come in and just listen and offer some data on what's going on and the promise to be a good neighbor and work together, that's the number one tool that we see that really kind of helps people.
I would say on the question of noise, early on in our process of evaluating solar projects, a community group took a trip to the solar farm in Wapello, just to kind of see what does it look like in operation, what are the impacts to the community, and noise was a concern of many people. Is this going to, at night or during the day, be something that's annoying? And we were able to stand, in the project, stand by the inverter, and have a conversation. So that kind of exercise really helped, I think, put to bed some of the fears around noise impacts when you can go to a site and actually see what they are. I think, these projects are still fairly new to Iowa, although we're seeing more of them. So I think the more people get experience with what they actually look like and how they sound when they're in operation, the more some of the the myth, so to speak, will be dispelled?
For us, we see a lot of it's more informing. So a few times it'll be on the aesthetics. We'll look at what's this going to look like, especially if it's a carport canopy. If I go to Mount Vernon and look at the rec center there, what is this going to look like? And as you drive by it, we've had some in Knoxville where we were going to power a library that had a terracotta roof. Okay, well, we didn't put it there. We put it across the street in a parking canopy because aesthetically it just doesn't look good. We want them to look good. Most of the other myths that I always have to spell out is the economics. You'll get the customers like, okay, if I go solar, I'm never going to have another electricity bill. Well, that's not quite right. Or if I'm in a utility that doesn't net meter, what do you mean I'm not going to get complete credit back? It's understanding how the rules for the rate structures and all that work. Seems to be more of the education is on the economics of it than it is on the what's the technology do. I mean, granted, we don't do a whole lot of tracker projects. We have a few, but not many. The noise issue is, yeah, I've heard that one too. And you're right. You can go out there and you don't even realize they're moving. And you're having this conversation. You look back and like, oh, hey, it moved. Didn't even hear it. Which is kind of more we see. I get more noise when I go to the grocery store than I do, near my solar arrays. So, yeah, most of our myths are based on the economics, and we try to do a very good job in making sure that our customers are fully aware of what's real and what's not. We want to make sure they have a realistic picture of what's going to happen. We don't want to overpromise and underdeliver. We want to do it the other way. We'll underpromise and overdeliver. And that's the way it all should be. Our customers should be educated on what is real and what is not. And so if they ask us why we didn't put a solar array over here, they understand that it wasn't economical or physically wouldn't fit, or there were some electrical issues that precluded doing it. So those are kind of the myths. Is more of an education that we deal with, other than busting myths.
Yeah, so one of the points raised in the climate statement that from the Iowa scientists this week was just that an acre of solar produces, much more than the corn that you would get if you turned it into ethanol. That seems like a tough, there's the land use questions in Iowa. There's what's the best use of an acre of land? I don't know how often you feel like that has come up.
I haven't had it come up with me very often, but most of my projects are not ag land. I mean, most of mine are distributed generation. It's rooftops, it's parking lots, it's the corner of the property for the school district that they don't use. It's not that I'm taking out hundreds or thousands of acres in a large utility scale project. So doesn't really come up to me that much. I mean, I have in past lives it's come up, but those projects have been on marginal ground that wasn't prime crop ground anyway.
I think sometimes we just ask ourselves, who's the authority to answer that question? Is it the landowner? We have pretty strong land rights, and that idea of it's my land, I can do what I want with it. In Iowa, are they the one to make that decision? Is somebody else, is the government the one to make that decision? That's where I think about, it's not the utility, it's not the energy provider who's the one who should be making that decision, because we're looking for voluntary easements. And oftentimes what we hear from a lot of landowners, it's them. They want to be the ones who's making that decision, kind of moving forward. As for the, if it produces ethanol more or the other, sometimes it's interesting. We hear people say we feed the world. And so you're taking an acre of corn out, and that's feeding the world, and then they say, well, actually all of my corn is going to make ethanol and fuel, so it's not really feeding the world. And so you're saying, okay, well, which is it? Are you making fuel? Are you feed? Are you using the corn stalks and the byproducts of that to make something else? So there's a lot of a lot of passion about this here in Iowa, and man, working in the fields, it is something that Iowa does amazingly well. And so it's just it's producing it's allowing us to have these sometimes difficult conversations about what are we doing with our land, what's it being used for, and who has the right to make those decisions.
I mean, that's a good one because you won't hear this complaint if you're going down to a farmer and he decides to put in oats or he decides to put in alfalfa versus corn and soybean rotation, or if he decides to graze ground or hemp or any other type of crop. You don't see that type of question come about. So I agree with what Justin said. It's that landowner, that farmers, it's their decision on what they're going to do with their land. Maybe they want to put it in CRP, or maybe they want to make a dirt track out of it. I don't know. I mean, it's their land.
I guess one last question. We're almost out of time here, and this is just related to best utilizing our renewable energy resources. I know, Justin, you mentioned battery storage. I don't know if that's included in the Lynn solar ordinance, if that's encouraged. But what role does battery storage play in the success of solar developments?
I think battery storage plays a role not only in solar, but in achieving more carbon neutral energy mix into the future. Each resource has its own pros and cons. Batteries definitely help out solar. They help out wind. They help out areas where you don't have either. So batteries don't need to be tied to solar. And originally they were simply because there were tax credits available for that. But now that the tax credits are no longer require the battery to be tied to solar, everybody realizes that batteries could play a role anywhere and everywhere. And they don't have to be tied to solar. We thought about putting batteries where you've got strong wind farms, so you can store some of that extra energy that's produced at night and discharge it during the day. So batteries, I think, will be very important moving forward. And we don't want to tie them strictly to one resource.
I would agree with that. I mean, wind, solar, and battery is a very good trifecta. You got wind is very more at night and in the winter, and solar is just the opposite. It's more in the summer and during the day. And the batteries is a great bridge between them. And it's coming. I mean, it's still the economics of it right now. Once batteries technology gets more economical, you'll see more and more of it go in. I mean, we're putting in batteries. I mean, Lion's putting in batteries. All the utilities are starting to, or at least looking at it. It's still pricey yet. It's coming down. I expect that it'll come down and you'll see more and more battery systems, whether they're tied to renewables or not. There's more a battery can do a lot more benefits than just storing energy. It can help with a lot of quality issues as well. So I think you're going to see a lot more batteries for here in Iowa, probably another 2 to 5 years out would be my guess in the economics getting there, but it's coming.
And Lynn County's ordinance does include language on battery energy storage systems. That was a pretty big component of our ordinance update. We had a group looking specifically at battery energy storage regulations and zoning code. And we see those as something that we'll expect to have a few applications for those in the future, either as standalone projects or as part of solar projects. But they're more compact. They're similar to a substation in footprint. And so that is something that we are aware of and have incorporated into our zoning code.
Well, that's great. We've finished our hour here. That time went really quickly with a lot of great information. I want to thank our panelists, Terry Dvorak with Red Lion Renewables, Charlie Nichols with Lynn County, and Justin Foss of Alliant Energy. Also, thanks to our sponsors, ITC Midwest and Cedar Rapids Economic Development. And thanks to you, our audience. We really appreciate you turning out for Iowa Ideas and participating in this panel and joining in other ones. It's been a great conference. So again, thanks to the panel and thanks to everyone. Have a good weekend.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
Thanks.